Joining us today from Australia is Lincoln Parker. He's the chair of the Liberal Party's Defense and National Security Policy Branch. Well, Lincoln, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's an absolute honor to be on the show with you guys. I love what you do. You're at the vanguard of tackling probably the biggest issue that's facing not just the United States, but certainly Australia, as we're in the thick of it. So thank you for what you do. It's my pleasure.
Well, thank you. Tell me more. Okay. So to get serious, I think Australia and New Zealand really have been sort of the Chinese Communist Party's testing ground for influence tactics that they use against the West. But it seems like China pushed too far in Australia, and there's been a big pushback from the Australian government and society. And the most recent example is AUKUS, an alliance between the U.S., U.K., and Australia. But is AUKUS something that Australia would have done even 3 years ago?
Absolutely not, Chris. You're so right. China has been trying to hollow out our willpower from within. I mean, they're very different from what the Soviet Union was trying to do to the West, and that was frontal attacks. Whereas with the West, and particularly in Australia, we've been a test bed, and you mentioned New Zealand as well, and perhaps let's not use Australia and New Zealand in the same breath.
Yes.
Because we are different countries, and we are certainly looking at our China relations very differently. And so China has been trying to subvert our democracy for quite a long time. And you mentioned the Australian government. It's certainly been the Liberal government has been undertaking a very concerted pushback ever since the time of Malcolm Turnbull.
The Liberal Party in Australia being the Conservative Party.
Yes, that's right. So we're down under, so things flip, right? So Liberal
they spin in the opposite direction.
Basically. That one too. Exactly. So the Liberal Party of Australia is our centre-right party, Conservative Party, a little bit akin to your Republican Party. We are a big tent, so of course we have different views. But certainly under the Morrison government, Scott Morrison is the current Prime Minister of Australia, we've been very front-footed in tackling the Chinese issues of coercion, subversion. You've seen what they're doing in terms of trade. They've put massive tariffs on all sorts of our products, from wine, barley, wheat, through to even coal. But now, as you have seen, they're running out of energy supply. They can't even heat their homes. And now they're having to return to buying Australian coal.
Just wait till they run out of wine.
Well, it seems they could use the Australian lobsters as a fuel source.
So when they did that, it was actually great for Australia, right? Because we suddenly had $20 lobsters to buy. So it was fantastic.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, we're making a trip to Australia.
I don't think we want to do that right now.
That is impossible right now, actually. So to get back to AUKUS, so why now? Like, what changed that this is something Australia would want to do?
Yeah, so Australia has always been reticent to go down the nuclear power path. It's always been reticent to go down the nuclear weapons path, and that's not what AUKUS includes, just to be very clear. It's nothing to do with nuclear weapons. However, it's inescapable, and you've been living under a rock if you haven't noticed that China is the world's most aggressive bully to smaller countries in particular. I mean, they're even bullying the United States. I don't know why, and why the United States is not pushing back a little bit firmer. However, certainly Australia, we're a population of 25 million, which is a little bit over half of the population of California, yet we inhabit a very large continent island. So we are, and particularly if we are cut off by the Chinese Navy, and you've had Cleo Pascal on before, I know, you see what the Chinese are doing in the Pacific Islands. That could certainly cut us off from any American aid. So I think Australia has looked at the imminent threat that China poses us and said, look, it is time for us now to have a capability that can certainly help us defend ourselves a lot better than what conventional submarines can do. And so we all understand that nuclear propulsion provides a much better, stronger capability for submarine and underwater forces than does a diesel electric submarine, which has to surface all the time. It doesn't have the same kind of range. It's just not as capable. And so I think that's, some people have said that's crossing the Rubicon, and I'm really glad that this government has done that, because at the end of the day, the government's first role is to look after the safety and security and sovereignty of its citizens. And we can see what China is doing. We've seen what they've done to Hong Kong. We see the constant threats that they're pushing onto Taiwan. We see what they're doing around the world. We see what they're doing in the Pacific Islands. And we see what they do to us every day through their cyber attacks, through, they've tried to bribe politicians in the past, Labor politicians. You would have remembered Senator Sam Dastyari, who had to resign because of that. They gave us a list of 14 demands. This is all while they claim to not want to interfere in the domestic politics of other countries, right? So it's pretty clear what they're trying to do to us, and we didn't want to lay down and take that like some other countries do.
So what's been the Chinese Communist Party's response to AUKUS? I mean, as you mentioned earlier, China has not been happy with Australia sort of standing up. The economic sanctions, the import tariffs that have been put on because the Australian government asked for an investigation into the origin of the coronavirus. So how have they responded to AUKUS?
Well, they haven't responded as belligerently as we'd expect, actually. So, of course, they've come out through their mouthpiece, the Global Times and China Daily and other publications, and they've said that, we're warmongers and that we're the whipping boy of the United States, all of the usual kinds of stuff. But they've been saying this rubbish for so long, and we see it in Australia so often, that it just doesn't make any difference to us anymore. And so, we don't really listen to it. We take their threats very seriously, and that's exactly why we've gone into AUKUS. And so, if anything, they should be looking at themselves within to say, why would Australia, a country that has in the past always looked to never go down the nuclear route, and suddenly they are? And so they are the entire reason, whilst the government may not state that as bluntly as I have, and I don't speak on behalf of the government, but it's clear that is the exact reason why we are doing that, to protect ourselves from them.
It's almost as if when you stand up to a bully, they back down.
Well, I'm not sure they'll back down, Chris. I mean, and we can get into the conversation of Taiwan at a later stage, but, things aren't looking good in Taiwan right now. We're just seeing the Chinese continue to increase their flights into Taiwan's air identification zone. We're continuing to see the rhetoric being ramped up on them wanting to reunify with Taiwan, although we know that that's, they've never been one nation. So we're seeing the propaganda and the threats really ramping up on Taiwan, and Taiwan is a very significant and strategic democracy in Asia that we need to protect and defend for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. I mean, they are free peoples. They are a democracy. They are about the same size as Australia. In fact, they're about 25 million people. We do a lot of trade with them as well. We should stand, as our former Prime Minister Tony Abbott said yesterday in Taipei, we should stand shoulder to shoulder with like-minded, freedom-loving democracies. But from a military perspective, that's the first island chain. So if China is able to take Taiwan, they have complete access out and can break outside of the first island chain into the Western Pacific, which Obviously Guam is your territory is going to be one of the first targets, but it also directly threatens Australia. It threatens all of our trade routes. And we understand through their aggressive stance that it's not going to stop with Taiwan. And if they take Taiwan, it also tells the rest of the region that, hey, what's happened to the United States? They couldn't defend Taiwan. Don't they have a treaty with them? Now, look, I understand that the treaty doesn't oblige the United States government to necessarily go in and put boots on the ground. However, perception is reality. We know that Taiwan is an ally of the West. It's an ally of the United States. It's an ally of all of the democracies. And so if China takes Taiwan, it's a big deal. The rest of the Asian region will fall. And we understand that. It may not fall immediately, but what's going to happen with Malaysia? What's going to happen with the Philippines? What's going to happen with Thailand? We know that they're not strong enough at all, and Vietnam, they're not strong enough to resist this massive bully. And so that is a big deal, and that threatens our sovereignty immensely. And so from a humanitarian standpoint, a freedom standpoint, a democracy standpoint, and a military and a sovereignty standpoint, Australia must stand with Taiwan.
Is that what Australia is signaling by Tony Abbott, the former prime minister, going to Taiwan?
Officially, no. So Tony Abbott is a former prime minister. He is not employed by the government. He has travelled there as a private citizen. He is not the prime minister's envoy as he's done in the past. Having said that, I think it does send a strong signal. If you've been looking at the media over the last day, and certainly the social media over the last day on Twitter, it has been full of quotes from former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, his support for the free peoples of Taiwan. And, maybe it is time that a discussion is held at some point that maybe Taiwan should become independent. We know that under this Chinese regime, we have seen a constant trajectory over the last 70 years. It's just been going on an upward trajectory of militarization and aggressiveness. And so one could make the argument that sooner or later, probably sooner than later, that China is going to attack Taiwan. So why not? But Shelley, to answer your question, officially the answer would be no. The Australian government has not changed its policy. I would think that Tony Abbott does probably speak on behalf of a lot of Australians in a private capacity. I'd certainly be one of those Australians. I absolutely support what he has done and what he has said. And I think certainly if you read the media accounts, many Australians also support his actions over the last couple of days.
So
this is kind of like a page from the Chinese Communist playbook, which is like, this company is a totally private company with no connection to the government. And now Australia is basically taking a totally private citizen. I mean, I'm not saying that he's connected to the government, but there's obviously that perception, right?
I think the U.S. did that recently too, actually, when...
Yeah, who was it that went over there completely on his own?
It was Pompeo did after he... Didn't he?
Didn't he? Okay.
Pompeo, if he didn't go, he was going to go. But there are cases where they send people who are not in the government anymore.
When you say they send people, who's doing the sending? You're saying that the private citizens go completely on their own.
Completely on their own.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, as Lincoln said, perception is reality.
Yeah.